Hello everyone, Luis Lopez here, and this video is going to be all about the first chapter in our 110 book. We've made it. Incredible. You're all amazing. Let's talk about your playback engine, your hardware, and I/O settings. This seems like it's going to seem like a lot of things we've covered already in this in the 101 book. But we're going to go a little bit deeper and go into some territory where you might not find yourself right now or next year, or maybe not until 5 years from now, but they're going to be very useful for workflow and customizing your Pro Tools to work for you. Okay, so very excited about this. So let's get started here. Okay. So first, just another brief reminder of how to access the dashboard. The dashboard is, of course, the thing that pops up when you first open up a session, right? I was able to get there. I opened up Pro Tools. I already have a session up here, but I just hit Command N to create a new, to have the dashboard pop up. You can, of course, go to your File menu and say, create new, and that's our same key command. Command N for new. And we have our create session. Now, just to, as a brief reminder, create, that's if you want to make a session from scratch. You can go to recent, which is all the sessions you've recently worked on. And this will go pretty far back, and you can continuously scroll through here. We'll talk about where that might be different. And then projects would be the only difference between a session, which you see here with this icon, and a project is that a project is stored in the Avid cloud, and a session is stored locally on a drive or on your computer's hard drive, right? So that's the main difference there, but all your projects will be happening here. You can see that I almost never use cloud based projects. One, I find that they're a little, I'm going to be hitting Pro Tools what it hurts. It's not very stable, and it's reliant on a secure Wi-Fi connection. I don't know about you guys, but every so often my Wi-Fi gives out. So I want to make sure that that I'm working from a stress-free place. So I tend to not go with cloud projects, but I'll show you what those are all about, which is the one I have up right here. Okay. In order to get to those, you have to sign in to your Avid account in Pro Tools. You can do that, but just clicking here, it will say sign in at the top here. And you can see I've already signed in. I've used 1% of my storage. And that's how we'll do that. We'll get into that a little bit later on, though, okay? But we'll double back on that in a second, okay? Of course, our playback engine, if you have and if you get a new interface and you want to be able to hook it up, of course, you can go to Setup, Playback Engine, right? And we talked about a few of these checkboxes and buffer sizes and all that. I'll go over these briefly. Playback Engine is, of course, where you want to, how you want to record and playback audio, right? Unfortunately, Pro Tools only allows you to use one device to both record into Pro Tools and to play back from Pro Tools, right? You can't select separate devices for it. You have to use one. So oftentimes you're either using, you guys are at home are probably using your built-in output, or you have an interface and you've selected that, and that's your playback engine. Buffer size. Of course, this is how as a reminder, this is how quickly you're asking Pro Tools to think while it's processing audio in real time. I'm giving it as much time as possible to think, but if you're recording, you're probably going to want to drop this down. This is dependent on how much RAM you have in your on your computer, or how fast your processor is as well. So if you ever want to check, if you have a Mac, you can go to About This Mac. You can see what operating system you're on. Be careful, because we're going to be switching to a new operating system called Big Sur. Do not make that change yet. Pro Tools is notorious for not keeping up with its operating systems on Macs. So wait, if you have automatic updates selected on your computer, turn that off and just do it manually from now on, especially if you're going to be using Pro Tools. Pro Tools is awesome, but this is one area where it's not. But in any case, you can see I have 16 gigs of RAM on this laptop, which is pretty good for a laptop. If you have 8, it's a little bit tougher. The processor's okay. I got this maybe a couple of years ago, so processor, your processor in your computer is probably a lot better. This is 2017. I'm gonna exit out of that. So that lets you know how much you can do here. Now, the more tracks you have, the more plugins you have, the more processing you're doing in the track, especially virtual instruments take up a lot of processing power. You may start experiencing like errors popping up. If you do, just increase your buffer size. It might make for a more delayed response when you're performing in, or when you're singing or tracking in. But these are the ways we kind of deal with the needs of our computer and the needs of Pro Tools. Ignore errors during playback. I'm going to turn this off because may cause clicks or pops. I don't want to be hearing clicks and pops during my playback, so I don't want to ignore errors while I'm playing back my audio. So just give me the errors so I know what's going on. I don't want to hear clicks and pops while it's happening. Dynamic plugin processing. I always have this on, and I always have Video Engine on, and I always have this set to normal. Okay. For this, Pro Tools will ramp up or ramp down your processing power based on the amount of plugins you have. So that's what dynamic plugin processing means. Video Engine, it will be this doesn't matter. If you imported a video, which we'll do later on, it will automatically ask you to enable the Video Engine. So that's not going to mess up anything, having that checked off or checked on. Okay. And then cache size, I have that set to normal. Again, if you saw that I have about 16 gigs of RAM to play with. I can go all the way up to 12 gigs, but that will make any other programs on my computer that are running simultaneously begin to get bogged down, and I'm running QuickTime right now. So I want to make sure I have, if I just have this set to normal, Pro Tools will move up and down the amount of RAM it's using based on how much performance I'm asking it from the session. Okay, so that should be a good catch up to how the Playback Engine controls work here. All right, moving on. So, considerations. Post-engine suppression. Oh, we didn't need to do any of that. Okay, so here comes the fun part here. We're going to go into we're going to say OK. And we're going to go back to setup. I'm going to go to hardware setup. Now, in this one's pretty simple. If you have a giant Pro Tools rig, which I know all of you guys do at home, you'll see some more what are known as peripherals. That just means things that are used for audio processing that are connected to your computer. In this case, it's just my interface, right? But what's nice is that Pro Tools, every interface comes with some type of application that controls how it's monitored. Monitored meaning playback levels, headphone levels, etc. We won't have time to go a deep dive into that because it's so user dependent. Focusrite has their own, Apollo has their own, my Mixpre has its own, so it's very, very specific. But if you guys have questions about your specific hardware, just let me know. But if you want to get to it, you can go to Setup Hardware and just click Launch the Status, the Setup app. In my case, I don't have a external application for this, so I just get this. It pulls up the audio MIDI setup window, and then I can see my devices here. Sometimes when it pulls up this window, you'll get this other window, which is show MIDI Studio. And you might see something that looks like this, and you're like, what the hell is this? It's like, And then this won't be shown. They might fix that with this latest update to Catalina, but sometimes this happens, and you'll be like, "What is going on? I don't know what to do." Just click out of that window, go stay in this application audio MIDI setup, choose the audio devices menu, and select here. But you can see I have it set for my my output, and I'm using 4 channels, 24-bit, 48K, which is exactly what my session is at. And my input is set to, this has 6 channels of inputs, 24-bit, 48K. And you may have to set that up, or you may not, depending on your device. Fun stuff. Okay, so on to some other stuff here. This is probably maybe the one of the more important aspects of Pro Tools is your I/O settings. You can get to them by going to Setup to I/O, but where you first see them is in the dashboard. I've said for the last 8 weeks now that stereo mix, that is the default setting for your I/O settings. Your default I/O settings is stereo mix, right? If you go to last used, whatever you did in the last session, that's what I/O settings you're talking about. So what does that even mean? What I/O settings? Where do we even see this in the session? You see this in your bus naming, the amount of buses you have, your hardware outputs, your hardware inputs, your bus inputs and outputs, how you rename them, all that shows up in your I/O list, okay? So you can say, well, what's the big deal with that? Let's go into the I/O settings here and see what we got, okay? So we have these tabs here at the top. These first 3 you will be using, no matter if you have an interface, you're hooking up a microphone or whatever, you will be using these inputs, outputs, and bus tabs here. So inputs. So since I had my hardware configured to show me 6 of the inputs on my device, on my mix pre, they show up here. So I have up to 6 available inputs to select from my inputs list on each track, right? At least my audio enabled tracks. If you don't see these, you may need to delete them and hit the default button, which I'll show later. Our outputs. This is how many outputs we have. On my mix pre, I have 4 outputs that I can have, right? But I have a main output, which you can always tell because it has this little speaker icon. So most of you will have like a headphone output. That's what this little speaker icon is going to direct you to. So we also see that in the output list of our tracks. So our input list, all that we see here, we'll see in our input list from each of our audio-enabled tracks. Our output list, this right here, is going to show up on the output list of our audio-enabled tracks, or at least our audio output tracks, which is everything in Pro Tools except a MIDI track, okay? And then busing. Now, as I mentioned before, busing is internally routing your audio in Pro Tools, okay? Anything that is done within Pro Tools is known as a bus, okay? Now, we get into inserts and buses and sends and effects returns. It's going to seem confusing, but anything that's routed internally, no matter what we end up calling it, is going to be using this bus menu. Now, you can see I have some things that say NA or non-applicable or not available. I want to get rid of these. So how would I do that? Well, you can select these by clicking on the first one, just like we do in Pro Tools, shift-clicking on the last one. You can hit delete path or just hit the delete key on your keyboard. And then we have just we've cleaned up our list. Okay, so when I say OK and go to my bus list, let's say if I was going to make a send, you can see my bus list has been shortened. Also, my output list has been shortened, right? Which is nice. Okay. Instead of having a bunch of things that I don't need. This happens a lot when you're switching one session. I was working on this session on a different computer with different hardware. If I want to clean up that menu, or I just want to get rid of a long bus menu, I can just go to IO, right? So let's say I want to shorten my bus menu even more. Like say I want my stereo bus, but I don't want all, I'm just going to be using maybe 9 buses. Select them. I'll do a different way. Delete path. Say OK. And now when we go back to that bus menu, it's now a lot shorter, right? So you can kind of clean up things as you're going along here, okay? Excellent. Now, every time you change your I/O, it is saved onto your system, not in the session folder. So I'm accessing this from the cloud session. This is not saved in the cloud session. Is the I/O settings are saved on your computer, right? So if you expect to have your same I/O settings or plugin settings when you go to a different computer, they will not be there because they are stuck on your computer, right? Where those are saved, we'll talk about in a second, okay? But you can save I/O settings, which is great. Now let's say I've been talking about how to set up sends and returns and renaming your buses and all this good stuff. I've done that here, right? So I've created this bus with this insert on it, and I went to bus, I created a new bus, and then I renamed it just by right-clicking on the bus and selecting rename. There's another way you can do that. You can go to setup, I/O, and let's say my inputs here. Right now they're just called in 1 and 2, in 3 and 4. But maybe you have like, you want to, it's a very specific interface where it has like a mic pre in it, right? And you might want to rename it. All you have to do is double click on it and rename it maybe preamp 1. Of course, a preamp is what you need to increase the level or the gain of a microphone, right? And let's say you have 2 preamps on your interface, right? Well, you can do preamp number 2. But then you might have 2 other inputs that are not mic inputs, but they are. Let's talk about this again. Slow down, Lou. Here we go. So we have our stereo inputs here. You can see because it has an arrow next to it. And this tells us that there are 2 inputs sandwiched together if we want to do like stereo recording, right? We could rename this, and we can name this preamps 1 and 2, right? But I clicked this down arrow and then renamed each one individually, right? Now, if I go and select this, and I want to rename both of these, I can just double click on here. And let's say I have line inputs, line being professional level inputs coming from like a mixer or something like that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry. This will come in time, especially if you take 96B or C. We'll be talking about this a lot. I switches to line 3 and 4, and then it automatically renamed the left and the right, or channel 3 and channel 4 in my I/O settings, right? And I can keep doing this down the line. Right. And now when I say OK, and I go to my input list here, oh, that's not on an aux. If I made a new track, I now, on my interface, I have preamps 1 and 2, line 3 and 4, renamed, and then I didn't rename this, so it stayed the same. But now we have very detailed, very clear ideas of what we have there. You might want to call that Focusrite 1 and 2, right? Or, Apollo 1 and 2, or whatever you might do it. Cool. Now we can save those I/O settings, right? They're actually already saved, but if we say export settings, we can name this. We can say, lose. Lose I/O. right? And you can see where the file path is. It's always saved to your documents in your Pro Tools folder and then your IO settings folder, right? So you can see you have some already built-in ones here. I'm going to add just one more to this IO setting. Say save. And it has illegal characters. It's probably that apostrophe. I'll just say Lewis and maybe the backslash. Yeah, so we're going to say just IO. Lewis IO, save. And now we've saved those settings. Now, why would that be helpful? Well, let's say you did all this naming, all this reorganizing, all these busing, and you want to, you don't want to rename every single bus every single time you bring up a session, especially if you're, if you're used to making a particular style of track, or you're composing and you always route all your vocals to one bus, or all your synths to another bus, or rename your stereo output. You don't have to do it every single time you make a session. You can just bring up a new IO setting, right? So in this case, you could go to Setup, IO, import a setting, and then select it from the list that you have on your computer. Now remember, you cannot find these anywhere else except for on your host computer, right? This is where it's saved. If you want to save this, you would have to drag a copy of it from here into your session folder. Okay, but they're saved on your host computer. That will come up on the exam. That will come up later in life, possibly, but that's where that would happen. Cool. You can add, you can't add inputs. Those are designated by whatever your hardware setting is, whatever your interface is. So I can't just magically have like 100 preamps in my input section, right? Same with outputs. Those are analog outputs that are set up for your interface. But busing, you can have as many buses as you possibly want. And I'm hesitant to say it's unlimited, but I believe it is in Pro Tools. I'm not sure if there is an exact limit on busing. Don't quote me on that. Look that up and tell me that I'm wrong. But to add a bus, it's pretty simple. You can say new path, and then I'll just do this. So right now I just have a mono path, right? I can say, just call it bus, right? And I'm just going to create one just to see what happens. Create. And it automatically names it the next number in the sequence here. So I'm bus 11 here. Let's go ahead and delete that just for fun. And let's do that again. And I'll show you how I really like to set it up. I always like to set up a stereo bus and then do this thing called auto create sub paths. So I was talking about how this arrow says that's the stereo version of your bus. A subpath are the two separate mono tracks or mono buses that are created when you create a new bus, right? So we're going to auto create the subpath here. When I do that, we have this drop-down menu here. Now, if you forget to do that, I'm going to delete that. You can see how easy it is to create and delete paths. Say stereo, and don't select that and hit create. Watch what happens. One, we don't see that arrow, right? And you can be like, oh yeah, no big deal, okay? And just say okay. But then you might get into trouble here and go like, oh, I want to create a send. I want to go all the way down to, bus 11 here. And wait, where's bus 11? I see stereo. Oh, bus 11 and 12. Okay, that's cool. But let me pull up a new mono audio track and then go to my bus list again here. And I can't see how I have individual buses for the stereo track, but I don't have individual buses for my bus 11 and 12. That's what happens when you don't check off that checkbox, the auto create subpaths. Okay, you won't get separate. You won't be able to bus out to separate channels, separate 11 and 12 channels here, right? But again, that's easy enough to do. Just go to Setup, IO, make sure you're in your bus tabs, delete that old path. We don't need it. And then new path, stereo, auto create subpaths, and then you can even rename the path right here. Let's say you want to name it drums because you're going to be making a drum bus. Create. Now you have this drum left and right automatically created. When you go to your output list, you're going to see drums, stereo, left and right, and those subpaths created. So I almost never do it any other way. You may find it useful to know both ways of doing it, but I usually just always have that auto create subpath created. All right. Let's see, am I forgetting anything else? I hope not. Oh yeah, not yet. So yeah, you can rename it from the I/O settings here by clicking, hitting. Oh, I hit enter. Sorry, setup I/O, double clicking, and then renaming it. But as I've shown you in previous examples, you can always rename it by just right-clicking or using two fingers to click on an output or input path, hit rename, and it will automatically name that. Let's say I did a bus path for, let's have some fun, and let's make it from this track here. Let's say bus 1 and 2. I want to route this to should be a refresher on how to make an effects return. We did that in the last last assignment we had. I'm going to make a stereo aux input. I'm going to put this effect I had on the track on this aux input, and we're going to call this synth reverb. Excuse me. I'm going to make a unique bus. Well, first I rename the track. Step 1, I'm going to solo safe the track by hitting Command S. Step 2, create a new input bus 1 and 2. Step 4, rename the bus. And we're going to call this the same thing as the track name, synth reverb. And you can see, and then route whatever track you want to this track to it. I used a send, and it was already routed to bus 1 and 2, but since I renamed it here, it renames it everywhere, which is awesome. And then if we go into our setup list, our I/O settings, we can see that it's already been renamed in our I/O settings too, synth reverb, which is awesome. And if we want to modify it here or in the track, we're obliged to do so. Now let's see what that might sound like in our session. Let me just do a couple settings there so we can hear it, and let's see if we got it right. Awesome. Cool. So we see that we got level here, and we got our buses renamed. This is awesome. Okay. Last thing, and this is the type of thing I was talking about at the beginning of this video, is what you might not come across is the output list, this monitoring path, all this good stuff here. It can get a little, well, let's just go over it and I can show you like where this might be useful. So monitor path, audition, this fold down output meter, and this AFL PFL. We're not even going to go over these three here, just because I just find that setting them at default is like exactly what you're going to need. But monitor path is really important. That is the path that is used for me to hear this, for you to hear all this. This is the default output path, and I have it set automatically to out 1 and 2. This is done automatically in your session as well, so you shouldn't have to change this. But if you wanted to, you could. If you wanted to hear it coming out different channels of your interface, or you want to set up a surround sound experience, you can do it from this monitor output path. But in our case, all we want usually is just output 1 and 2. But let me show you something that would be really useful to do. It's in our bus output paths. This is super cool. So our output meter path, I always have that set to just our regular output path, right? But check this out. So the default output bus path. So default meaning like when you make a track, where is the output routed to? And for most of you guys, it's probably routed to the same output as your, let's go both places here. It probably looks like this, where the output is the exact same as the bus output is the same as your meter output. That's typically what we want. But when I create a new output bus, check this out. I'm going to switch it in my stereo settings. And this is the lame thing. You have to do it separately in your mono settings too. We'll talk about that more as we go along, but trust me on this. I'm going to hit OK. Now, instead of, I set up this like stereo bus in here with this one plugin on it. It's not my master fader. You can notice I'm monitor left and right by this one stereo bus. When I create a new track, let's delete these. When I create a new track in Pro Tools, Shift Command N, hit return, the track automatically routes to the stereo bus, right? Instead of monitor left and right. So I'm forcing all the new tracks to go in here rather than here, right? So this is really helpful, especially, I do a lot of post-production work where I'm bringing in new tracks all the time, and I need to have them routed to what's known as an effects track, right? For film. I'll often set up a bus like this by a fancy way of doing this is holding down Control and double clicking. That'll create a bus path. Oh, but this one's not stereo. Let's make it stereo. The only way to make something a mono track stereo or stereo track mono is just, well, one of the best ways to do it is just deleting it and then creating a new one from scratch. So stereo, aux input, and I want to create a new bus, solo safe, rename it, just effects in this case. Rename the bus, right click, rename, same thing, effects. And then I would go to my IO and rename have the default output bus go to that new stereo effects track that I just made, and do the same thing for mono for when I import mono tracks, right? If I don't do this, my mono tracks will go to a different output, whatever I had selected previously. And then I hit OK. And now when I bring in a new track, a little fancy footwork here, I'm going to hold on Command and double click. That'll create an audio track. See how it automatically goes to this effects bus? So that can save you a lot of time rather than going like every time you make a new track, you got to go here and route it to where's my bus? Oh my God, my list is so long. It'll just automatically do it right away. Okay. And that is it for now. I hope that was helpful for you guys. I know it was a little bit of a long one, but we got more along the way. Stick around as we talk about how to open up a session, a project, and like different ways of adding tracks, which I kind of gave you a sneak peek here. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.